Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So again, this bipartisan report that came out on the attempted assassination of President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania last week concluded that in the absence of fundamental reform, another Butler can and will happen again. The report suggests that Secret Service should shred responsibility for investigating financial crimes, forgery and so forth, so it can be hyper-focused on its most vital task of protecting protectees. The report makes broader criticism of the Secret Service's culture, including, quote, a pattern of undertraining, an attitude of doing more with less, which is inconsistent with its no-fail mission, an over-reliance on assigning personnel based on categories like former candidate versus nominee, instead of individual risk assessments, and a lack of auditing and continuous improvement mechanisms. The report also, specific to July 13th, finds that there was inadequate planning and coordination before the July 13th rally in Butler, and placing the AGR building and where the shooter was positioned and the surrounding area outside of the secure perimeter. That was a mistake. The report also states the local sniper teams inside that building had a narrow field of vision, were not positioned to monitor the building. There was no unified command center to facilitate communications between the Secret Service and its state and local partners. And the shooter did not use a ladder to access the top of the building, but instead climbed on air conditioning units along the side of the building to easily scramble onto the roof. Perhaps that should have been noticed as a potential area of concern.
Used it as a stepladder. There you go.
In addition, there's some questions about who actually shot the would-be assassin. I don't know why the panel doesn't reach a determination on this. It would seem that you could determine this by the caliber of the bullet that took out the would-be assassin, but there's a suggestion that it was a local law enforcement officer that fired the first shot that may have gotten Crooks to stop the would-be assassin to stop shooting, but the Secret Service sniper is still being given credit for the kill. Regardless, it's a pretty comprehensive indictment of Secret Service, not just with respect to July 13th, but with respect to the culture writ large. But our next guest has written a piece for The Hill, thehill.com, in which he suggests that, there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking by people who don't appreciate the nature of the job of being a Secret Service agent and what goes into it, and that, it's not like Clint Eastwood in the Line of Fire. That's not the gig. It's a little bit more complicated and perhaps mundane than that. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid author of that piece. He is Bill Gage, former U.S. Secret Service Special Agent from 2002 to 2013, during which he protected George W. Bush and the Obama and designees of their administrations. He is now a senior security consultant with Safe Haven Security Group. Bill, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So I guess maybe get your reaction to those the conclusions drawn in that report that was issued last week in the context of what you want people to understand about Secret Service.
Yeah, and Dan, I read the report, and those of us that, within the first couple days after the incident in Pennsylvania, those of us that kind of inside knowledge of Secret Service mechanisms and these complex protective operations kind of figured out right away probably what most likely went wrong, one of which was the miscommunication during the pre-advance between the Secret Service and the local law enforcement. And that's what led to who was responsible for the AGR building. And I've been on numerous outlets talking about that even before this report came out, that most likely what happened was some miscommunication between who was specifically responsible for what areas at the event. And so, the next question is, well, why would the miscommunication happen? And listen, it could have been inexperience on the part of the site agent. It could have been inexperience or just an oversight by the supervision, because these protective plans have layers of supervision that are supposed to approve them. And, let's be honest, and I've talked about this on other outlets, the Secret Service is stretched incredibly thin and have been for several years. They were stretched thin when I was there. And it's a simple supply and demand equation where there's only a certain supply of agents with an incredibly increasing demand for them. There's more living presidents now than ever before. The Secret Service has picked up family members, grandkids. So they're stretched incredibly thin. So that probably had a lot to do with why there was some miscommunication there between local law enforcement and the advance agents.
Well, regardless of the number of agents, I mean, what's the normal protocol? What does a site agent have to, organize in order to have a safe area for any president to visit? I mean, what's the local, what are the rules when you're meeting with local police? How do they interact with Secret Service to secure the president?
Well, as someone who's done many, many sites, you have to be incredibly specific. And generally, the Secret Service gives the local law enforcement sort of what we would call like no access posts, like no discretion. Nobody comes through here under any circumstances. I remember one time being at a post early in my career at a hotel in downtown D.C., and an not elderly, but maybe in his 70s, gentleman came up to me and said, "Hey, I need to get through here. I have an event to get to." And I said, "Oh, no, sir, you're not allowed through here." And we had a conversation, not really an argument, but a discussion back and forth. And he tells me, that he needs to get to this meeting. I called the senior site agent who came over and said, "Oh, yeah, he's fine. He can come through." And as he walked through, the senior site agent whispered to me, "Hey, that's Mr. J.W. Marriott. He owns Marriott Hotels." And so you have to have like a discretionary or non-discretionary post for the local law enforcement so they don't run into these situations. And, another reason that you have to be very specific with the instructions for them is that they don't do this every day like a Secret Service agent would. And so they might not understand sort of what I call like a measured response to things, because I've been on many outlets. I've talked about this at every single Secret Service event I worked in my 12 plus years there. At every single site, there was always a report of a suspicious person, a man with a gun. There's possibly a bomb here. Those go on at events all the time. And at every single event, you can't immediately rush the president off stage because there's a suspicious person in the crowd, or report of suspicious person, because one, it would just be simply embarrassing for the president. They wouldn't be able to get their job done. So the Secret Service has to take this measured response until there's some confirmed threats. And I know that's been talked about a lot. And even the report, the House report mentioned that about how, the Secret Service detail, the detail leader for Trump in Pennsylvania was really never specifically told, "Hey, there's a man with a gun on the roof," until, obviously well after the shots had been fired.
Yeah. So, I mean, the building itself, though, I mean, we've talked to other Secret Service agents, including Tim McCarthy, about this, and they really don't provide any defense for the failure to do like the basic thing that you don't need to be a Secret Service agent to understand, that you don't let anybody who is a non-authorized personnel onto an elevated position within sight of the stage where a president or any protectee is going to be. So even if there is a lack of communication, I mean, you have people there, you have dozens, if not hundreds, of law enforcement there. I mean, you see a building that is unprotected. You see snipers that have full view of the footprint of the place. I mean, how does nobody see that this is a vulnerable position that needs protection. And then when you have people that were attending the rally pointing over there and saying "man with gun," and local law enforcement, you had the one local law enforcement captured on his body cam audio saying, I told these guys about this shooter. I mean, I understand it's more complicated than I understand. I haven't been a Secret Service agent, but I mean, there's just it's not a resource issue. That's a judgment, leadership, organizational issue, what happened at Butler.
So a lot to unpack there. So, just to touch on your first point, yeah, clearly either two things should have happened. Either the AGR building and those surrounding buildings should have been considered inside the perimeter. Either that should have happened, or two, there should have been some dedicated resources to the building, both the perimeter and the interior, with very clear instructions on no one is to access this building under any circumstances. And though neither of those two things happened, and that was a clear failure. And how that failure happened, I'll just circle back to what I said at the beginning of our conversation here, which was clearly that was the fault of the site agent and the overlapping supervision who was supposed to approve, because there's always a supervisor walkthrough that occurs at these pre-advances, or not pre-advance, but during the advance, before the event happens, there's always a supervisor who walks through. So clearly the supervisor missed that as well. And so I agree with you and maybe some of the other guests you've had on. Tim McCarthy is a very revered figure in the Secret Service. So clearly his judgment and analysis can be trusted. And I agree, if that's something that he said, that clearly was something that should not have happened.
What was the culture like for your more than a decade of service at Secret Service? Because, this isn't the first time that Secret Service has been called into question in terms of what exactly is going on in that agency. In fact, Susan Crabtree, the investigative reporter for Real Clear Politics, has been writing about the Secret Service for more than a decade. And there have been some pretty high-profile, embarrassing episodes, both here and overseas, that speak to I don't know, a lack of accountability within the Secret Service. And frankly, the response from Secret Service in the wake of July 13th has been less than inspiring, where sort of general responsibilities accepted, but no, the site agent who all you professionals say was obviously failed. We don't want to. I'm not going to start naming names. I'm not going to start naming positions. Well, that's exactly what needs to happen if you want anybody to believe there's accountability within the agency. And that doesn't even get into some of the personal excesses and so forth that have occurred there. So, I mean, I get your perspective. I would like your perspective on the culture when you were there, how professional it is or isn't, and what you think should happen in the wake of these latest attempts on President Trump's life.
Yeah, great question, Dan. I want to break that down into two parts. The first part, listen, during my time there, and it's the case now, you have an agency made up of incredibly dedicated and competent people, very bright, smart people, very capable, that get let down by their agency. I have said this on other outlets, that every director since 9/11 has failed, because when the world changed on September 12th, right, we had an entirely new threat environment, and there was tons of money and assets and resources being devoted by the U.S. government to defending the homeland and increasing the budgets of the FBI and creating Homeland Security and giving enormous amounts of budget increases to Border Patrol and HSI and ICE and the FBI, and the Secret Service essentially got crumbs. And there should have been a vast increase in the size of the agency and the budget and the capabilities after 9/11, and every director from 9/11 on has failed. They might have asked for a little bit here, a little bit there, but there should have been a significant laser focus after 9/11 on increasing the size and capability of the agency. So let me then talk about your second point there, Dan, where, listen, all the sexiness of the Secret Service that you see on TV with the earpieces and the sunglasses and the mystique, that's great, but the truth of the matter is that these are federal employees. They have federal civil service protections. And I'm not agreeing with that system. I'm just saying the reality of it is the Secret Service cannot come out and say, oh, employee X failed and we are firing them. These employees have civil service protections, and the Secret Service has to navigate very complicated federal civil service laws. They have rights in accordance with the law, and it's very difficult to fire a federal employee regardless of where they work. And so I think that's one thing that's being missed by members of the media, and I don't mean that negatively, Dan, at all. I really appreciate the media. It's part of the reason I enjoy coming on these shows to try to set the record straight. But, the fact of the matter is federal employees, regardless of the agency, they have civil service protection and rights, and the Secret Service just cannot fire them without due process.
No, that's true. I mean, but that speaks to a larger problem in the federal government. But you could still identify people who are responsible and hold them accountable to the extent the rules and regulations allowed. And it just doesn't seem like that happens. And somebody will quietly retire once the attention has been moved elsewhere, and that's just not accountability in my view. What about the culture there when you were there?
Yeah, so, the culture kind of mirrored what I was saying earlier. Highly dedicated people that spend days and weeks, away from their families, motivated, that just got let down, by the agency repeatedly as far as training and capabilities of the agency. I know people want to focus on these incidents that portray a bunch of hard partying, fraternity-like atmosphere of agents out, not focused on the job and spending their hours drinking in bars, and for the male agents, trying to find women to,
right.
Yeah. So, that was not my experience. But listen, the Secret Service hires from the human race. It is not some, outlier out there that has some secret method to screen prospective agents, to ensure that they're not going to behave that way. And so the Secret Service hires from the human race. And, you even look at an elite agency like the CIA, they have personnel problems. And I'm not trying to
starting at the director level
there.
Yeah.
So I simply am saying that every elite agency, even our Tier 1 military special ops units, they have personnel issues from time to time. So my experience was that was such a small percentage of Secret Service culture, and not by and large what I experienced.
All right. So in your piece, you said that a protectee of yours once soiled himself. Can you tell us who that was, and if his last name rhymes with Ryden?
Listen, I have a sense of duty and honor to the Secret Service.
I know you can't tell me.
Yeah, and I won't reveal any of the names that I did mention in the article. I do want to come out and say that just so there's no speculation, because I've been on other outlets and podcasts, and there's internet sleuths out there. I've had this happen to me where they research stuff and they come back and they're like, oh, it had to be this person. I would tell you that was 100% not President Biden. It was somebody else.
Okay.
I just want to make that clear that it was not President Biden, but out of a sense of duty and honor,
I understand.
to the Secret Service is not going to reveal any of the names in that piece.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, there are so many, octogenarian politicos in D.C. It could have been anybody. Anyway, Bill Gage, a former U.S. Secret Service agent, 2002 to 2013 during W and Obama. Now a senior security consultant with Safe Haven Security Group. Bill, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Have you heard about this guy, Donald Rainwater?
I sure have. Guy was a deadbeat dad. Total loser.